I'm a relative newcomer to the Warhammer 40K universe. And as someone who's, by the way, thank you to Focus Entertainment and Saber Interactive for sending us over a copy of Space Marine 2. It absolutely made my weekend. So right off the bat, I'm going to get that out of the way. But as someone who's now played Space Marine 2 and has been very excited about it coming up to release, it's not actually from the point of view of a Warhammer fan, because again, that's something I'm relatively new to. It's actually from the point of view of a World War Z fan, knowing that Saber Interactive was working on a Space Marine sequel, and also that Swarm engine was going to be used in, for to bring hordes of Tyranids to life in this game. That's what caught my eye initially. So with that in mind, I was like, all right, I'm gonna play Space Marine 2. I love that tech. I love that horde mechanics that they have, and to kind of flip it from being this sort of like horror-esque horde, survival shooter to giving you this sci-fi power fantasy, I thought was going to be. I mean, look, it was an instant wish list for me. And then since then, because I was anticipating this game, we played through Space Marine. I also played Warhammer 40k Darktide. Nick and I had both previously played Bolt Gun, and I've even painted a few miniatures here and there. So with that said, I went into Space Marine 2, and I am so happy to say that it is everything that I wanted this game to be.
That's good to hear. I saw you were streaming it, and I stayed away.
No, yes, I'm glad you
still intending to play it. But
I'm glad you did, because there's going to be quite a few surprises in this game. But the thing is, as I was playing the game, and by the way, this is not my full review of the game. I've put about 10 hours into it, and I've completed the campaign, and I've dipped my toes into the operations mode. I've not looked at the PvP mode at all. So in the coming days and weeks, I'm going to be playing more of that, and kind of exploring the other game modes. So in a way, you could kind of maybe treat this as a campaign review, or just like first impressions, if all else fails. These are first impressions. But as I was playing the game, and I'm going to do this as spoiler-free as I can, as I was playing the game, I kept getting reminded of something else that I had recently experienced, a piece of media that I had recently consumed, and that was Alien Romulus. And as the more I thought about it, I think the broadest way to explain this is it's actually reminded me of Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Now, there's the spoiler versions of this is already up on the website. You can check it out on respawnstation.com. But the spoiler-free version of this discussion is that just like Alien Romulus, Space Marine 2 hits a lot of the same general story beats as its predecessor, and as the thing that it is being a sequel to put it in the weirdest way possible. And again, on the website, I've put in a few kind of vague examples of what I'm talking about, but there's several things. If you played the first game, and especially for someone like myself and also Nick, who we've just recently played Space Marine, there's a lot of Space Marine 2 that could feel familiar, and you might even be able to like draw, like you can say, oh, this is going to happen, something like this is going to happen, and something like that will likely happen. It does pivot in the last like chapter, and it delivers on this sort of it delivers. I'll say this: it delivers on the war part of Warhammer, unlike any other game that I've played in this universe. But other than that, there's a lot of the familiar story beats, characters that are like, oh, you're almost that other person that I know in Space Marine. But with that said, it's not a bad thing at all, because for me, and I think a lot of other people, Space Marine 2 was just essentially, okay, I should say, Space Marine 1 kind of perfected this formula of this, hey, this is a simple mechanics that make you feel like you're this, I don't know, like 7, 8, 9, I don't know how tall Space Marines are, but like these giant towering superhumans that are just a force to be reckoned with. And it has just enough surprises and intrigue where you're like, oh, I kind of understand this universe a little bit, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. And all of those things Space Marine 2 does, but it does it with such a higher fidelity, obviously on modern consoles. And like I was saying, that swarm engine, it's very similar. If you've played World War Z, there are certain kind of like setups and areas that you're like, okay, I've been in these similar situations. But again, it's in such different context because it's not just essentially you're not just like surviving in a New York subway trying to fend off zombies, or sorry, Zeeks as they're called. It's you're like bring on the fight. Not all the time. Sometimes it truly is like an overwhelming amount of enemies. And I thought the first Space Marine had a lot of enemies thrown at you. This is like, I mean, look, if you've seen any of the trailers for this game, you'll have probably identified that there's just like vistas where you'll see swarming Tyranids around, and it really captures that scale so well. And also it whether you're new to Warhammer like myself, or if you're an experienced Warhammer fan, it gives you immersion in this universe on a scale that I don't think this universe has ever seen. I'm not saying that there's not been a massive scaled Warhammer game. There's a lot of Warhammer games, but like Rogue Trader, Total War, like these games are inherently not the same AAA quality third person. Like, they're not batting the same cages, if you will. I don't know if that's a saying. I just made that up. But they're, Space Marine 2 has a production quality and a level of cinematic kind of presence that I have not seen in this universe before. And it is so consistently like awe-inspiring. And like this game, there are stills in this game that would feel perfectly at home in r/birds for scale, where it's just massive things are happening and colliding and falling, and you're just weirdly enough, even though you're again a 7, 8, 9 foot Space Marine, you feel like you're such a small part of this kind of grand war that's going on. So in all that, it is awesome. And the story itself, despite having the story beats that I was saying, does also manage to have a few surprises, and the voice acting is solid all around. I didn't think I'd find this being a problem, but I actually do kind of miss Mark Strong as the voice of Titus.
I was going to ask you that. I have 3 things that I wanted to bring up, and one was, did it take a little bit of time to adjust to the new voice actor?
It's not that he's bad, right? I want to make that clear, but I think that Mark Strong had a certain level of I don't know if it's suave or like grit or just stoicism, like that just worked for the Titus. And so I was surprisingly attached to his performance, where I came to hear, I'm like, I kind of wish, it was Mark Strong instead. But regardless,
and I'm wondering how much of that is proximity. Like we just played that game.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's also a fair factor. And again, that's also could be a factor for everything I said earlier about how, like the story beats feeling familiar, because if you haven't played Space Marine in like 10 years, you're going back to this, it'll probably feel a lot more fresh and new for you. But either way, there are still some surprises and twists along the way that did make me go like, oh shit. And again, I don't know too much about the universe. I'm kind of putting it together as I go, but it was a fun adventure to go on for about like a 9-hour campaign. And like I said, there's operations, which are essentially like how it works is, as you're playing the game, there'll essentially be like another trio of Space Marines that'll be like, yeah, we're going on this other mission. And then you can go to the terminal and then just play as them and then go on that other mission, like as a side operation. So that kind of stuff. Again, I haven't really delved into too deeply. So I'm looking forward to just getting my hands on this game even more and playing it. It feels just as kind of intuitive to play in terms of, the parrying and the general combat. It's even more intense, like I said, because you have the Swarm engine and the package overall. Again, the game is so consistently firing on all cylinders that I'm just, often blown away at the game's landscapes and presentation. And so any kind of small gripes I had with it, which, is like there's some occasional hiccups with performance, the connectivity of co-op over the weekend, at least. I know there's a patch that already went out for day one. Over the weekend, the co-op connectivity was off, like where, the game was stuck on a loading screen when Austin and I were trying to play together. And then when, I restarted, I was able to get back into the game immediately, but he was stuck on a black screen. And even after reloading, he couldn't get back in. So, that kind of stuff sucks. And there, there's, again, it's like the minor stuff that overall don't detract from the game experience too much for me. And so, Nick, it feels good to say that I think we've both had stellar weekends. You played Astrobot. I don't know. I can't speak to you if you think that's one of the best games you've played this year, but I can confidently walk out of Space Marine 2 and say that, it's one of the best games I've played this year.
Yeah, Astrobot's definitely in top 3 for me personally.
What a week, huh? What a week we've had.
Yeah, I actually had 2 more things real quick, Sri.
Sure.
Talking about Space Marine. Both relatively quick, I imagine. One
challenge accepted.
Is one of the criticisms of the first game that I had in our talk on Retrograde.
Nick, was the amount of metal walkways in the level designs that were just blocked by boxes. I'm assuming it's better in this game. I hope it's better in this game. Okay, so I didn't want to mention this if you didn't bring it up. I did have this point in mind because so look, it's definitely not as bad. There are you do go into metal hallways, and one of the weird things is that the metal hallways combined with the Tyranids, who are inherently, at least to me, like xenomorph inspired. I felt like I was in an alien game almost. There was like times where I was like, oh, this feels so alien, because like the lighting will go out, you're in these cramped hallways, Tyranids are fucking swarming into you, and you're just firing through as you're it feels very alien-esque. So the thing is, there's not as many metal hallways. It's much more, there's a lot more diversity in terms of what you're playing, but that's
what I wanted to hear.
But like Nick,
there's a but.
There's this repeated thing, and I have to imagine it's this game's version of like how in not Gears of War, God of War, there's like that meme of like, oh, you have to squeeze through a cramped spot, to like get load to the next area. In this game, it's these you have to press square on these objects that you're essentially like, every time you're clear an area, you have to go up to these things, and you have to like push something out of the way, and then you could progress. But it's so clearly just this repeated animation, because sometimes you'll be pushing like this big, fucking rock. Sometimes you'll push a statue out of the way. Sometimes you'll push like an industrial, like maybe like a shell of a artillery or ammo weapon. I don't know, something. But they're all, it's like a handful of animations that are just the same thing. It's like, and then push, and then you go to the next area. So that kind of stuff is still there, but not a little bit more diverse.
I'm fine with them using the metal hallways and stuff, as long as there's just like a little bit of decoration in there or something to break it up a little bit.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to ask was just relating to the combat, because I know that there's just based on looking at it from trailers, there's a little bit more depth in this one, just not only from like the enemies that you're fighting, but also with that parry system. Like, did that feel good throughout the game? Did it ever get like overly repetitive, or like was it just kind of like solid throughout?
I mean, it's I think it was solid throughout. I think some people might be like, oh, it could maybe get repetitive, but I mean, so much of the game's combat is almost like stitching together animations where you're in the middle of the, just either shooting or, chain sorting or power axing, whatever. Tyranids, and while that's happening, you'll see this blue mark that comes up that you can parry with, and that starts this animation, and it's one of a few different animations, so it's not like you're not watching the same kill animation over and over again.
Right.
But there's also, if you dodge out of a way of an enemy in time, essentially a small like reticle shows up on the enemy's like body, and if you press R2 in their general direction, it then it starts another animation where it's Titus takes out his pistol or whatever secondary fire, and then pops one in the head. Similar to Space Marine, if they start pulsing kind of right, this is in Space Marine 1, right? If they start pulsing red, if you go up to them, you can do like a finisher move that gets your health, right? Yeah, that's in the first one. So that's in there too. But again, it's this another kind of anime. And by the way, in the animation in this is much more gory in terms of it almost feels like a God of War-esque kill. Like some bosses you're taking down and you're like, oh, Kratos would be so proud of you. So I think it was super awesome, and when it works, and it puts these tools out for you, and it's really up to you on how you play the game and stuff. So when you successfully chain together a bunch of hits, and then you pop one in the head, and then you do a finisher, you counter one, it really, again, it feeds into that power fantasy so well that I did not mind at all that you're cycling through some of these animations.